For 3 months, she sat at the same window seat every afternoon. It was a quiet corner inside Morning Verse where sunlight spilled softly through tall glass windows and rested on the wooden table like a warm invitation. Mwende liked that seat. From there, she could see the street outside, watch people pass by, and still feel tucked away in her own peaceful little world. Most days, she arrived with her laptop, a notebook, and the same gentle smile she carried everywhere she went. She would greet the staff, order coffee, and settle into her routine of working quietly while soft music played in the background. To anyone else, she might have looked like just another traveler enjoying Seoul. But to one person in the cafe, her presence slowly became something impossible to ignore. Mwende had been living in Helsinki for 6 years. She worked as a UX researcher for a Scandinavian tech company, a job that suited the part of her that was patient and precise and genuinely curious about how people experienced things. She was good at listening, good at finding the pattern in what people said and what they actually meant. Helsinki had shaped her in quiet ways. The Finns had a concept she had come to appreciate, sisu, a kind of resilient, unshowy determination. You didn't complain, you didn't perform. You simply endured and kept going and trusted that the effort was enough. Mwende had found something of herself in that. She had come from a loud, warm, expressive family in Nairobi. She loved that too. But Helsinki had taught her the value of stillness, of showing up quietly and consistently without needing to be noticed. Her faith was like that. She didn't talk about it much in professional settings, but it was the thing she returned to every morning, a short prayer, a verse she kept in her phone notes, a Sunday routine that held the week together. Her love life had been, for several years, uncomplicated by the fact that there wasn't much of one, not for lack of opportunity, but Mwende was particular in the best sense of the word. She knew what she valued. She knew what she needed in a person. And she had long ago decided she would rather wait for something real than settle for something convenient. Seoul, she thought, would be a break from everything. She had no idea that real life was about to become something entirely new. In Soo had noticed Mwende during the second week she began coming in. At first, it was simply because she was new. Morning Verse had regular customers, and In Soo had grown used to recognizing the familiar rhythm of their visits. But Mwende was different. She came almost every day, always around the same time. She preferred the window seat. She always ordered coffee first, and tea later in the afternoon, usually around 3. She had a quiet habit of pausing from her work every once in a while to simply look outside, as if she was thinking about something important, before returning to whatever was on her screen. In Soo noticed these small details without realizing he was noticing them. He would glance toward the window while wiping the counter, or while preparing someone's drink. Sometimes he caught her smiling at something on her laptop screen, a private smile, not performed for anyone. There was something peaceful about her presence. It made the cafe feel calmer, somehow. Soo was not a man who moved toward people quickly. He was warm, but he was measured. He ran Morning Verse with genuine care for the people who came through the door, but he maintained a certain professionalism about it. With Mwende, it crossed that line slowly. So slowly he barely noticed it happening. Their first real exchanges were small. "Another coffee today?" he asked one afternoon. Mwende laughed softly. "I think Seoul is turning me into a coffee addict." "In that case," he replied with a small smile, "we are doing our job well." She chuckled. After that, their conversations slowly became longer. Nothing dramatic, nothing overly personal. Just simple exchanges that made the afternoons feel warmer. Sometimes they spoke about Seoul. She asked about neighborhoods, about what was worth seeing beyond the obvious, about where locals actually ate. And Soo found himself giving answers that were longer than necessary. He noticed this. He didn't stop. One afternoon, Mwende noticed a small framed piece on the wall near the counter, handwritten text behind glass, simple and clean. She stood near the counter reading it quietly. "Morning verse," she said softly. "That's where the name comes from." In Soo nodded. Lamentations 3:23. "My cousin and I both grew up in church. When we opened this place, we wanted the name to mean something." Mwende looked at him. "So did I," she said. "Grow up in church." It was a simple exchange, but something about it created a quiet sense of understanding between them, as if a door had been opened that neither of them had consciously knocked on. Over the weeks that followed, the four of them began spending more time together. Sometimes they stayed late after morning verse closed, the chairs turned up on the tables around them, while they sat talking with coffees that had gone cold and no one cared. Other nights, they went out together. Ji-sung knew a shabu-shabu restaurant 2 neighborhoods over that became a group favorite. In Soo knew a rooftop bar with a view of the city that they visited once on a warm evening and never quite stopped talking about. Seoul slowly became more than a travel destination. It became a place filled with specific memories. The four of them crammed into a photo booth near Hongdae, laughing too hard to keep still for the camera. Walking through Bukhan Hanok village in the early morning before the tourists arrived. Without realizing it, Mwende had become a natural part of morning verse's daily rhythm. Regular customers started recognizing her. The staff greeted her like a colleague. Even Zai-sung joked one afternoon, "You work here more than we do." Mwende laughed. "Don't tempt me. I might start asking for a salary." In Soo, wiping down the counter nearby, said nothing, but he smiled. Time has a way of moving faster when life feels good. Before anyone was ready for it, the final week of the trip arrived. Mwende tried not to think too much about leaving. Instead, she focused on being present for every remaining day. Her second-to-last afternoon in Seoul, she sat at the window seat with her laptop open. But she wasn't really working. She was watching the street outside, memorizing the afternoon light on the buildings. In Soo approached her table with a cup of tea. "I didn't order this," she said. "I know," he replied. "A goodbye gift." For the second-to-last afternoon. She looked at him. "You're making it harder to leave." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the cafe continued around them. Then she said quietly, "I'm really glad we found this place." In Soo nodded slowly. "So are we." He meant it in more ways than one. The next day was spent with Etienne, walking the city, visiting a few last places. A long dinner that ended with both of them talking about Seoul, the way people talk about somewhere they already miss while they're still in it. That night, Mwende lay in bed listening to the city and felt something she hadn't expected to feel quite so clearly. She didn't want to leave. Not just Seoul. The people. 2 days after her second-to-last visit to morning verse, Mwende boarded her flight back to Finland. The plane lifted slowly into the night sky, carrying her away from the city that had given her so many unexpected memories. When she arrived in Helsinki the next morning, the air felt colder, quieter. Life returned to its familiar rhythm: work, groceries, snowy streets. The particular piece of a life that was good and stable. But sometimes, in the quiet moments of the evening, Mwende found herself thinking about Seoul, about morning verse, about the people she had left there, about the window seat and the afternoon light, and the sound of the city through the glass. She told herself it was simply that the trip had been wonderful. She told herself the feeling would fade. It didn't entirely. Back in Seoul, morning verse continued operating as usual. Customers came and went, coffee machines hummed. Music played softly in the background, but something felt different. In Soo noticed it on the third day after Mwende left. He glanced toward the window seat out of habit, and for the first time in months, it was empty. He stood there for a moment, staring at the chair. A customer at the counter said something. He turned and responded. He went back to work. but the window seat stayed in his peripheral vision for the rest of the afternoon. Someone sat there around 4 o'clock, a young man with a textbook and headphones. He stayed for an hour. He left. In Soo cleared the table and wiped it down, and thought, without meaning to, that's not her table. He didn't examine the thought too carefully, but it stayed. It was strange, he realized over the following days, how one person could change the atmosphere of an entire place. Her presence had been quiet. She had not demanded attention. She had not been loud or disruptive, but she had been consistently, reliably there. And the cafe felt the absence, the way a room feels, the absence of a window that used to let in light. That evening, after the cafe closed, In Soo sat alone near the counter. Ji-sung had already gone home. The chairs were turned up on the tables. The lights were dimmed. The music had been switched off. In Soo sat in the quiet with his phone. He stared at it for a long time before he opened their chat. He started typing several things, deleted them, started again. Finally, he kept it simple. The cafe feels strange without you sitting by the window. He looked at it for a moment. Then he sent it. A few seconds later, Mwenda's phone buzzed in Helsinki. She picked it up and saw his name on the screen. She read the message twice. Then she smiled and began typing a reply. She typed slowly. Did anyone sit at my window seat today? The reply came almost immediately. No. Then another message appeared. It's still yours. Mwende leaned back on her couch. Outside, Helsinki was cold and still. Inside, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel quite so strongly. She typed, "You're dangerous. You know that." His reply, "The seat is just waiting. No pressure." She laughed out loud in the empty apartment. Over the following days, he sent her photos. The morning light through the front windows, a new plant he'd put near the counter, a particularly perfect cup of coffee he'd made that he thought she would appreciate, and occasionally the empty window seat. Every time, she laughed. "You're trying to guilt me into coming back," she told him. "Maybe," he replied. Then, after a pause, "Is it working?" She didn't answer that one. But she saved the photo of the window seat. A few weeks later, their messages slowly turned into phone calls. The first one happened almost accidentally. Mwende had been working late when a message appeared. "Are you still awake?" She typed back. "Barely." A few seconds later, her phone began ringing. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Hi," In Soo said quietly. There was a small pause. Then both of them laughed. "I didn't expect you to actually call," Mwende admitted. "I didn't expect you to answer," he replied. That first call lasted 40 minutes. From that night on, their conversations began stretching longer. Sometimes 30 minutes, other nights 2 hours. The time difference meant calls happened when one was beginning the day while the other was ending it. Seoul was 8 hours ahead of Helsinki. They made it work. They talked about the small things first. Funny customers at the cafe, a project she was struggling with, a new dish he'd tried at the restaurant near his apartment. But gradually, the conversations went somewhere deeper. He told her about how Morning Verse had come to be, how he and Ji-sung had both wanted to create something that felt like the kind of space they'd always wanted to exist, a place that slowed the day down, that felt safe. She told him about Helsinki, what she loved about it, what still felt foreign, the particular loneliness of being far from home that never entirely went away even after years. He listened in the way she had come to associate with him, quietly, completely, without rushing. One evening he said something she hadn't expected. "I pray for you sometimes." She was quiet for a moment. "What do you pray?" she asked. "That God keeps you," he said simply, "wherever you are." Mwende didn't respond immediately. She sat with the weight of those words for a moment, then said softly, "I pray for you too." One evening, after a particularly long conversation, Mwende ended the call and sat quietly in her apartment. Snow was falling outside the window. The room was peaceful, but her thoughts were restless. She thought about their conversations, about how icily they spoke, about how often she found herself waiting for his messages, not anxiously, but the way you wait for something that has simply become part of your day. About the photo of the window seat she had saved on her phone and never deleted, she whispered softly to herself, "What is happening here?" Later that night, she bowed her head and prayed, "God, if this is something you're doing, help me understand it. And if it's not, then help me let it be what it is." Thousands of kilometers away in Seoul, In Soo sat alone in morning verse after closing. The lights were dim. The familiar window seat stood quietly near the glass. He had spent weeks convincing himself that what he felt was simply friendship, but the truth was becoming harder to hold at a comfortable distance. He missed her. Not just the conversations, not just the messages. He missed her presence, the specific quality of a room when she was in it. And suddenly, the thought of her never coming back felt heavier than he expected. He sat there for a while. Then he bowed his head and prayed the most honest prayer he had prayed in a long time. A few nights later, during one of their calls, Mwende said something unexpected. Achiang and I were thinking about visiting Seoul again later this year. In Soo sat up straighter. "Really?" "Yes," she said casually. "There are still so many places we didn't see." There was a brief pause. Then he asked quietly, "Would you come back to morning verse?" "Ian, you laughed." "Of course." Then she added playfully, "I need to check if my window seat is still available." In Soo smiled to himself. "It is." A small silence. Then, quietly, "I'm glad you're coming back." He said it simply, the way he said things that were true. Mwende held her phone after the call ended. The snow was still falling outside. She looked at the saved photo of the window seat and felt something settle in her chest. A quiet certainty. She was going back. 6 months passed slowly. Winter melted into spring. Spring turned into early summer. And finally, one afternoon, morning verse's door opened. In Soo was behind the counter preparing drinks when he heard familiar laughter from the entrance. At first, he thought he imagined it, but when he looked up, he froze. Mwende was standing near the door. For a moment, neither of them moved. She looked exactly the same warm smile, the same calm presence, the same gentle eyes that seemed to notice everything. Then she lifted a hand and waved. "Hi." In Soo walked toward her slowly, almost as if making sure the moment was real. "You came back." Mwende smiled. "Told you I would." They sat together at the window seat that afternoon, the same one Mwende had used during her first visit. Sunlight streamed through the glass just like it had months earlier. It was remarkable, she thought, how familiar it felt, as if this seat had been holding a shape for her while she was gone. For a while they spoke about simple things. The flight, Helsinki, the café, a new plant he'd added near the counter that she immediately noticed. But eventually the conversation became quieter. In Soo looked at the table for a moment before speaking. "I realized something after you left." Mwende waited. "I told myself it was just friendship, that I missed a good regular customer and a person I'd had good conversations with." He looked up at her, but that wasn't honest. Mwende felt her heart beat a little faster. "I tried to ignore it for months," he continued, "but the truth is, I was hoping you would come back." The cafe around them hummed with quiet life. Mwende smiled softly. "I was hoping to come back too." She paused, not just for Seoul. That evening, they walked through the streets of Seoul together. The city lights glowed softly around them. People passed by. Cars moved through the busy roads. But the two of them walked slowly, enjoying the simple moment of being side by side again. After months of conversations across continents, they were finally standing in the same place once more, and this time, everything felt different. Because now both of them understood something they hadn't fully admitted before. What had begun as a presence at a window seat and grown through months of messages and late-night calls had quietly, patiently, faithfully become love. Sometimes love doesn't begin with grand gestures or dramatic confessions. Sometimes it begins with small conversations, shared laughter, and a window seat in a quiet cafe. For Mwende and In Soo, their story had started in the simplest way possible. But God had been writing it long before either of them realized. And this time, when Mwende left Seoul again, she already knew she would be coming back, not just for the cafe, but for the man who had been waiting by the window. He kept her window seat empty for 6 months, not because he planned to, not because he asked anyone to, but something in him already knew that she was coming back, and she did. Sometimes love doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives like morning light through a cafe window, slowly, quietly, and more beautifully than you expected. Story 3 is coming. 2 proposals, 2 weddings. Seoul in spring. Morning verse where it all began becomes the place where 2 families gather. Subscribe to Written by Grace, Faith and Forever Stories. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded. Love sometimes begins at the most ordinary table, in the most ordinary place, on the most ordinary afternoon.